So many of you are probably aware of a lot of the different types of content that Ann and I, as well as a bunch of us, other of us in tech marketing do. We basically, we get asked these questions like, how do you set this stuff up? How are you capturing, all these videos? So we actually have a tech marketing lab. It's basically an entire workspace environment with all the different services added, all the bells and whistles, so we can kind of see how this stuff works, how it impacts users. And actually, we recently migrated from our on-prem Citrix virtual apps and desktops to the virtual apps and desktop service. And I have to say it was extremely easy.
But I feel like, Dan, it was easy for us because our environment, we basically just rebuilt the entire CVADs in the cloud. And so we don't have any real users. We're not an environment that needs to run 24/7. We don't have mission critical apps. So really, if our environment is down or stops working, I mean, our team will be mad, but besides that, it's not anything that's mission critical. So I think when we're talking about production environments, that's a whole different ballgame.
Wait, so you're saying that our simple environment doesn't mimic the real world?
Not quite.
You're right, and that's why there's a better approach than how we did it. Like Anna said, we didn't have to worry about production and things like that, so we just rebuilt. But there's actually better ways of doing this, and that's why we're bringing in one of our consulting experts, Brendan Lin. Welcome, Brendan.
Hey, how's it going?
Good. So, what's your background that makes you the one of the big migration experts?
Well, so my background is I've been in Citrix consulting, or started out in consulting back in 2004. So I've been with the company 16 plus years. Pretty much doing field project work, and then most recently as a enterprise architect in Citrix customer success. So that means that I do a lot of project oversight for all of the enterprise customers in the US West region. So I get to see a lot of customer environments, lots of customer situations, and help guide customers along the way to Citrix cloud success.
Awesome. So, Brendan, why don't you tell us a little bit about what you're seeing in the real world? Like, what is happening in the field? What are real customers doing when they're migrating to cloud?
Yeah, and I think that where we often see is with, and this is a simplistic view, but this is what we see in the field a lot. And this is an on-premise implementation of Citrix. So that consists generally of a virtual apps and desktop site. Maybe that's running a 7.15 LTSR, a current release, or sometimes even a legacy version like 6.5, for example. This is the generally where I have a lot of customers starting from when they're talking about a cloud migration. And you could add complexity to this for sure, like maybe having multiple data centers, maybe a little bit of DR, but for starting purposes, this is where we begin the conversation. And we see a lot of customers now looking into Citrix Cloud, and for a number of reasons. One is around increased work from home capabilities, adding DR. We've just seen a ton of digital transformation happen over the course of years where businesses are looking to be more agile, looking to provide users with access to different resources or upgraded resources, etc. So see a lot of customers looking to cloud and for that.
Yeah, and that's one of the sorry, that's one of the things with the whole cloud service is that a lot of organizations can't build something a global environment to scale that has the global server load balancing handles any type of fault tolerance for different geographies. It's just not it would just cost way too much money. So that's, I think, one of the huge things with just having a cloud service is letting someone else handle that aspect of it.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, customers don't want to be in the business of maintaining all the infrastructure, especially as we look towards adding more and more capabilities, such as Teams optimization or additional capabilities for 3D workloads or things of that nature. And where I try to step back and talk about Citrix Cloud is, okay, we talked about this is where customers start from, and there is a migration path where we could just take this and kind of uplift it, convert it into the Citrix Cloud. But I do like to step back and talk about how Citrix Cloud is more than just the virtual apps and desktop service. Citrix Cloud really does span a lot of other functionality. And this comes into play when we talk about a phased migration path, because customers, this is kind of a choose your own adventure of how to get from point A to point B. And it depends on the customer's appetite for risk and change on how they want to go along this path. But along this journey, it's worth understanding that there's all these other pieces of functionality that could be introduced into the environment at different times. So for example, like the workspace service for access, the gateway service for the secure remote ICA proxy, workspace environment management, etc. So there's a bunch of services in addition to the virtual apps and desktops component. And I want to walk through that here as a potential phase migration path. And the way that I like to structure this is there is a way to reduce the amount of change for the end users, but also introduce functionality in a type of transition path to build on and eventually migrate to cloud. So the first step in this process is Citrix Cloud onboarding. So that essentially consists of adding the Citrix Cloud connectors tied into a Citrix Cloud tenant. And at that point, we're basically onboarded into Citrix Cloud. So it's pretty much that simple. Now, as we want to look to add some functionality, we could look to some of what I call the helper services, like workspace environment management, for example, analytics or ADM, and introduce that even into the existing environment. So through this, we can just add functionality and get some benefits without actually having to perform much in the way of migration. And so WEM provides the ability to optimize workloads, increase user density, shorten login times, so that's great. Analytics can also be added into the environment, so you can look at the security, analytics, and user behaviors. And application delivery management can be tied into the Citrix ADC, so you have a single pane of management and monitoring for all the ADC appliances. So from there, what we could do is then add in the Citrix Virtual Apps and Desktop service. And that essentially is the bottom left of this diagram, where we have the Virtual Apps and Desktop site with the Citrix license in SQL, Studio Director. All of that would be operated as a service in Citrix Cloud. Now, one of the major hurdles is how to get those configurations from on-prem into the Virtual Apps and Desktop service. And Citrix last year came out with the automated configuration tool in order to facilitate that. So what that tool does is it takes a source Citrix site, and it could be multiple sites. It could be a bunch of on-prem sites or one, and it could even take on a cloud site. And what we have essentially is a series of PowerShell commands to export configurations into these YAML files, which can be manipulated and then merged into the destination Citrix Cloud site. And this facilitates a phase migration because you could take, for example, just a subset of delivery groups or a subset of applications, and automated configuration tool is going to help out with all that. It takes the applications, the delivery groups, policies, icons, catalogs, etc., and really alleviates a lot of the manual effort. From there, what we have is these applications defined in the virtual apps and desktop service. So what we could do is then migrate over a VDA to the cloud. And what that consists of is basically re-registering a VDA from the virtual apps and desktop site on-prem to the cloud connector. And there's another key component here, which is to connect Storefront to the cloud connector so that Storefront is aggregating both of these sites. So from the user perspective, they're still accessing the same URL and they're looking at the same icons. It's just that once they click on this other icon through the manipulation and facilitation through the automated configuration tool, now they're just now launching an application via Citrix Cloud.
And I think, Brendan, that's something key to highlight, right? Like it can be transparent to the end user, whereas they don't have to really know that this is happening. It's seamless for them, but you're making that migration while still keeping some things on-prem. I think there's a lot of customers think that they need to do an all or nothing. And I think it's great that you're walking us through this path where it's like you can slowly at your own pace and as it makes sense, as you're repurposing hardware or whatever it may be, moving these resources to Citrix Cloud.
Yeah, and I pretty much always advise on a phase migration path versus the big bang, just because it reduces the risk to users and it facilitates a easier rollback plan in the event that something goes awry. And as a customer continues to migrate VDAs to the cloud, we could eventually then decommission that on-prem site. So at this time, what we've completed is a Citrix Cloud migration.
I was just going to ask, is some of the key decisions or any gotchas that need to be, a customer need to be worried about as doing this whole migration?
Yeah, that's a good question. And this gets into some of the particulars as we go from on-prem sites to Citrix Cloud. Earlier I mentioned that this is a simplistic view, but oftentimes we see multiple sites on-prem aggregated, whether it's a pod architecture, for example, in order to scale large, or for multiple geo-distributed sites. And one of those considerations is as we go from the multiple sites on-prem to a Citrix Cloud model with multiple resource locations, that effectively is what we consider a zone. And that does impact the resource enumeration and the session routing. So kind of in the past, we've gotten very familiar with aggregating multiple sites within Storefront. And one of those considerations is around resource aggregation and deduplicating icons. So this is largely a Storefront configuration that facilitates that the enumeration from multiple sites. And then once we consolidate those multiple sites into multiple resource locations or zones, then we go back to some of the other tricks within the Citrix tool bag to facilitate that session routing. And the first is with the zone preference and failover. So as the number of resource locations increase, then what we could do is implement zone preference and failover with one of three methods, and that's application home zone, user home zone, or location based, which is facilitated by a gateway. And so what we effectively state here is if you have an application such as Teams, for example, that's published out of an on-prem site and also a public cloud site, then you can specify which zone that application should be launched to first, and then there's some failback behind that. So if on-prem were to fail, for example, then you can fall back to cloud. And that helps with some scenarios where customers are looking to burst into cloud as part of their cloud migration. So they have X amount of capacity on-prem, and then anything left over kind of goes up into additional burstable resources in public cloud. And then another aspect is, or configuration option is around application groups. And this is similar to zone preference and failover, except it allows for a priority based, an ordered list for your delivery groups. So you could say, for this application, I want it to launch from this delivery group, and if that's full, then go down and cascade to the remaining delivery groups. So where do customers typically go next? I would say one of the biggest things is around public cloud. So adding another data center or public cloud region or multiple public cloud regions is extremely simple from the Citrix Cloud perspective, in that it's possible to just install cloud connectors in that particular region as a resource location and then hooked into Citrix Cloud. And then once you add some VDAs in there, then you really do have that single pane of glass management where you can access and facilitate access to resources from on-prem and public cloud, GCP, Azure, AWS, etc., all from the virtual apps and desktop service. I would also say that this is where customers look to Workspace as another means to their phase migration path. And Workspace is an alternative access mechanism with a cloud.com access URL. And Workspace provides access to not just the applications, virtual applications in desktop, but also can add in functionality such as micro apps and secure workspace access for SSO to SaaS apps and on-prem web apps and things of that nature. So as more functionality is added into Workspace, then there could be a transition path from users connecting to their URL that they've been accessing this whole time to Workspace to get more of the benefits of Citrix Cloud.
Yeah, and I think that's important, is that organizations can go either route they want, staying with the same UI of storefront that the users are used to, or if they're looking to kind of move the whole environment further ahead with the whole workspace concept, they can make that like the initial step. I like, that we're not forcing people to have to go down the workspace to be able to get to the virtual app and desktop service.
Awesome. Well, Brendan, we really appreciate you being here. I think this has been very insightful. Customers will find it very useful to know that there's no one path to get to Citrix Cloud, that we really are here to meet you wherever your choice may be. So thank you so much for being here, Brendan. We really appreciate you coming on Tech Zone Live.